Before the podcast plays, I just wanted to encourage anyone listening to visit St. Peter's tomb beneath the main altar of the Vatican if you are ever in Rome. In August 2016, I got to take the so-called Scavi tour below the Vatican and see the necropolis mentioned in this podcast, and the culmination, seeing the open tomb. It is dark and I could see little, but the jawbone is visible and faithful can still see that in the tomb on this tour. It is amazing to know you are only 10 feet or so from St. Peter's remains, including remaining bones. It connects you in a way that is hard to explain. St. Peter, pray for us. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that I think a lot of you have probably thought about before, the history and archaeology surrounding St. Peter's tomb.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of great sources that we're going to be looking at today.
Okay.
We have an article from alatia.org and another one from ewtn.com. And both of them are just jam-packed with information about some of the discoveries that have been made and the debates that have surrounded this topic for so long.
Yeah. Sounds fascinating.
I think we're going to uncover some really interesting stuff here.
Absolutely. It's a story that I think really combines faith and historical evidence in a way that few other stories do.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with kind of the basics, I guess you could say. It's long been believed that St. Peter's Basilica was built over the tomb of St. Peter himself.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of a powerful idea, right?
It is. And, that belief really went pretty much unquestioned for centuries, really, until like the 20th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, as our sources point out, in 1939, Pope Pius XI passes away and requests to be buried in the Vatican grottos.
Okay.
Which, seems pretty simple and straightforward enough, right?
Well, not quite. The grottos were already pretty much full of papal tombs, so Pope Pius XII had to figure out a way to make some room.
Okay, so they had to do some rearranging.
Yeah, basically.
And so that's where things, I think, start to get really interesting.
Absolutely.
They start excavating to try to make more room, and they end up uncovering this entire Roman necropolis right there under the basilica.
I know, it's really amazing.
It's mind-blowing to think about everything that was just kind of hidden there for centuries.
Right underneath where people have been walking for all these years.
I know.
It's really incredible. The excavations actually went on for years, from 1940 to 47, and they picked it back up again from 53 to 57.
Wow.
And what they found was remarkable, this vast network of tombs that date back to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD.
So we're talking about tombs from the time of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Wow. So among all of these incredible discoveries, I imagine the one that stood out the most was the one they believed to be St. Peter's tomb.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It was definitely the highlight for a lot of people. They found this small funerary monument, and it's known as the Trophy of Gaius.
Trophy of Gaius.
Yeah, and it dates back to the mid-2nd century, and archaeologists believe that it marks the tomb of St. Peter.
Hold on, Trophy of Gaius. I gotta say, that name doesn't exactly scream St. Peter's tomb.
Yeah.
How did they even make that connection?
That's a great question. It really comes down to looking at historical accounts and matching those up with what they were finding archaeologically.
Okay.
We know from historical records that St. Peter was martyred in Rome under Emperor Nero around 64 AD.
And of course, Nero is pretty infamous for persecuting early Christians.
Exactly. And back then, the early Christians, they had this practice of burying their martyrs near the place where they were executed.
I see.
It was a way to honor their memory and kind of keep their story alive.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how does that tie into this Trophy of Gaius and the whole necropolis that they found?
Well, tradition says that St. Peter was crucified upside down in the Circus of Nero, which was located near Vatican Hill, and that's exactly where this necropolis was found.
Oh, okay, so geographically it lines up.
Exactly.
But is there anything besides just the location that ties this monument to St. Peter specifically?
Yeah, there's more. So around the year 200 AD, there was a priest named Gaius, and he wrote a letter. And in it, he specifically mentioned St. Peter's tomb being located in the Vatican.
Oh, wow.
So this letter, it basically gives us a written record from someone who was alive relatively soon after St. Peter's death, and it really supports the idea that the Trophy of Gaius is St. Peter's tomb.
So we've got historical accounts that say that St. Peter was martyred in Rome, early Christian burial customs, which suggests that they would have buried him in that same area.
Right.
And then we've got this letter from Gaius, who was a priest who lived not too long after St. Peter died, and he specifically mentions that St. Peter's tomb is in the Vatican.
Right.
So it's kind of all converging on this Trophy of Gaius.
Yeah, it all lines up really well.
But were there any physical remains that were found that could maybe be connected to St. Peter?
That's where it gets even more interesting.
Yeah.
So in 1941, Monsignor Koss, he was the one overseeing the excavations.
Okay.
And he was examining the trophy of Gaius, and he found this hidden cavity, like a little secret compartment within the monument.
Wow.
And guess what he found inside?
What?
Human bones.
Oh, wow. Are you serious?
Yeah. So they found bones right there in this monument.
That's incredible. Could those be?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the bones were initially put aside and actually kind of forgotten about for a few years.
Oh, wow.
But when they were finally analyzed, the results were amazing.
Okay, don't leave me hanging. What did the analysis show?
Okay, so the analysis revealed that the bones belonged to a single male, and he was a robust man, like a strong and sturdy build.
Okay.
And they estimated that he was between 60 and 70 years old when he died.
Well, that seems to line up with what we know about St. Peter.
Right.
A fisherman, probably a pretty strong guy.
Right.
And according to tradition, he lived to an old age.
Exactly. And there's one more piece to add to all this. Remember that inscription we were talking about earlier? The one that they found on the wall near the hidden cavity?
Yeah.
Well, it's written in Greek, and it says, Petro Ini.
Petro Ini. I don't speak Greek. What does that mean?
It's been interpreted as either Peter is here or Peter rests in peace.
Wow. That gives me chills.
Yeah.
You got the tomb, the bones, and even an inscription. This is like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie.
I know. It's pretty incredible.
That's pretty convincing. But I'm guessing not everybody was totally on board with all this right away.
Well, you're right about that. Not everyone immediately accepted that this was truly St. Peter's final resting place.
Right.
Even with all that evidence, there were some people, and there still are today, who question whether the relics are authentic and whether the evidence has been interpreted correctly.
So who were some of the people who were skeptical, and what were their main concerns?
As you might expect, a lot of the skepticism came from those outside of the Catholic Church, particularly from Protestant historians.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, their theological perspective is quite a bit different from the Catholic view of St. Peter and his role in the church.
Exactly. Some of those Protestant scholars, they question whether St. Peter was even ever in Rome at all.
Really?
Yeah, let alone whether he was martyred and buried there. They see that traditional story more as a legend that kind of developed over time, and they don't really think it's based on solid historical fact.
So they're basically questioning the whole foundation of the story,
Pretty much.
St. Peter being in Rome in the first place. So how did the Catholic Church respond to these challenges? Was it mainly defensive, or did they try to actually engage with these different viewpoints?
I'd say it was definitely more than just being defensive. There was a genuine desire to try to address these questions and concerns in a way that was intellectually honest. Even within the church, there were differing opinions about what the evidence really meant. Some urged caution and emphasized that there needed to be more research and verification.
So it wasn't just blind faith overriding everything else.
Right, not at all. It was really a complex process of weighing the historical accounts, the archaeological findings, the scientific analysis, and then, of course, the theological implications of it all.
So a delicate balancing act.
It was. It really was. But after years of studying and debating all of this, Pope Paul VI made a pretty significant proclamation in 1968.
And this is what the EWTN article refers to, right? The official statement about the relics.
Yes, exactly. Having looked at all the evidence, Pope Paul VI declared that the relics of St. Peter have been identified in a manner we may consider convincing.
Wow, that's quite a statement. So the church basically affirmed the authenticity of the relics after carefully considering everything.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
But you can imagine, even with that declaration, there are still some people who have differing opinions. Historical and archaeological debates like this, they're rarely ever completely settled. New discoveries can always pop up, or new interpretations of the existing evidence could emerge.
That's true. It's always kind of an ongoing process of discovery.
Yeah.
But I imagine that for a lot of believers, the fact that the church, with all its history of scholarship and critical analysis, ultimately came to this conclusion must be pretty significant.
It is. For many Catholics, it's a powerful affirmation of their faith. It shows that faith and reason can coexist and can actually work together really well.
So now I want to go back to something that the Alatia article brought up, which is that the relics of St. Peter were actually moved at some point in history.
Oh, yeah.
And sound like a plot from a Dan Brown novel or something.
It's a pretty intriguing part of the story for sure. The evidence seems to indicate that during a time of intense persecution in the 3rd century, the relics were moved from the Vatican to the catacombs of St. Sebastian.
Wait a minute. So St. Peter's remains were basically hidden away for some time? Why would they do that? It seems awfully risky.
Yeah, it really was a pretty desperate measure that was taken to try to protect the relics. During the reign of Emperor Valerian, Christians were being persecuted really severely, and their holy sites were often targets for desecration.
So they were worried that the relics might be destroyed or desecrated.
Right. And so they moved them to the catacombs to try to keep them safe.
It's incredible to think about these relics surviving through all that turmoil and upheaval.
I know. It really speaks to just how far people will go to protect the things they consider sacred.
For sure. So speaking of enduring power, there's one more interesting development in this story that brings us a little bit closer to the present day.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It involves Pope Francis and what I think you could call a remarkable gesture of unity.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to hear about this.
So in 2019, he gifted a portion of the relics of St. Peter to Patriarch Bartholomew.
Wait, are we talking about Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church?
Yes, that's right.
Wow, that is a huge gesture. I mean, especially considering the history between the Catholic and Orthodox churches.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think it was deeply symbolic. It really highlights that shared history and the spiritual connection between these two branches of Christianity.
Right. I mean, they both revere St. Peter as this incredibly important figure.
Exactly. He's considered the first pope by Catholics and the first patriarch of Constantinople by the Orthodox.
That's right. So by sharing these relics, Pope Francis was acknowledging that shared heritage and kind of expressing a hope for greater unity and understanding between the two churches.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story of reconciliation. And it kind of reminds us that even with our differences, we often have more in common than we realize.
And it's especially striking that these relics, which were once at the center of so much debate and controversy, have now become a symbol of bridge building and dialogue between these different Christian communities.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing how something so ancient can still have such a powerful impact on the present.
It really is. It speaks to that enduring power of faith, history, and the human search for meaning and connection throughout the ages.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm struck by the fact that this story is about so much more than just bones and stones and inscriptions.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's about faith, history, and the search for meaning that has resonated with people for centuries.
It's a testament to that very human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
Something that transcends time and place.
And it reminds us that even in a world that's so often driven by skepticism and doubt, there are still places and stories that can inspire awe and wonder.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, I'd encourage you to keep exploring, delve deeper into the history and significance of St. Peter's tomb, read more about it, reflect on what you've learned, and let this story spark your own curiosity and deepen your understanding of the incredible tapestry of faith and history that has shaped our world.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this fascinating journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in all those discoveries.
Right.
The tomb, the bones, the inscription.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that not everyone was totally convinced right away. Were there really serious doubts about whether this actually was St. Peter's final resting place?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Even with all that evidence, there were and still are people who have their doubts about the authenticity of the relics and how all those findings have been interpreted.
Okay, so who were the doubters and what were their main concerns?
Well, a lot of the skepticism came from outside the Catholic Church, as you might imagine, particularly from Protestant historians.
That makes sense. I mean, they have a pretty different theological perspective from Catholics when it comes to St. Peter and the role he played in the church.
Exactly. So some of those Protestant scholars, they even question whether St. Peter was ever in Rome at all, let alone whether he was martyred and buried there. They tend to view that traditional story more as a legend that kind of developed over time and not as something that's based on solid historical fact.
So basically, they're challenging the whole idea that St. Peter was even in Rome to begin with.
Pretty much, yeah.
So how did the Catholic Church respond to all this? Was it mostly just defensive? Or did they make an effort to actually engage with these different viewpoints?
I think it was definitely more than just being defensive. You know, there was a real desire to address those questions and concerns in a way that was intellectually honest and open.
Okay.
And even within the church itself, there were different opinions about what the evidence meant. Some people were more cautious and emphasized the need for more research and verification before drawing any firm conclusions.
So it wasn't just blind faith winning out over everything else.
No, not at all. It was
Yeah.
a very complex process trying to weigh the historical accounts and the archaeological findings and the scientific analysis. And then, of course, you have all the theological implications to consider as well.
Sounds like they had a lot to juggle.
Yeah, they really did. But after years of study and debate, Pope Paul VI made a pretty significant proclamation in 1968.
This is what the EWTN article talks about, right? That official statement from the church about the relics.
That's right. After reviewing all the evidence, Pope Paul VI officially declared that, quote, "The relics of St. Peter have been identified in a manner we may consider convincing," unquote.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. So the church basically affirmed the authenticity of the relics after doing their due diligence and carefully considering everything.
Exactly. But of course, you can imagine, even with that official declaration, there's still going to be people who have different opinions.
Right.
I mean, historical and archaeological debates are rarely ever completely settled. You never know when some new discovery might pop up or when someone might come up with a new way of interpreting the evidence that's already out there.
That's true. It's an ongoing process. But I imagine that for a lot of believers, the fact that the church, with its long history of scholarship and critical analysis, ultimately came to this conclusion about the relics, must carry a lot of weight.
Oh, it absolutely does. For a lot of Catholics, it's a really powerful affirmation of their faith. You know, it shows that faith and reason aren't necessarily opposed to each other. They can actually work together and support each other.
Okay, so now I want to circle back to something that the Alatea article mentioned, which is that the relics of St. Peter were actually moved at some point in history.
Oh, right.
It sounds like something straight out of a Dan Brown novel.
It really is a fascinating twist in the story. So the evidence suggests that sometime during a period of really intense persecution back in the 3rd century, the relics were moved from the Vatican to the catacombs of St. Sebastian.
Hold on, so they actually took St. Peter's remains and hid them away somewhere else? Why would they go to all that trouble? It seems pretty risky.
It was definitely risky, but it was also a pretty desperate time for Christians. Back during the reign of Emperor Valerian, there was some serious persecution going on, and a lot of Christian holy sites were being targeted and desecrated.
So they were worried that something like that might happen to St. Peter's relics.
Exactly. And they wanted to protect them, so they moved them to the catacombs.
Wow. It's amazing to think about those relics enduring through all that turmoil and upheaval.
It really is. It's a real testament to how far people are willing to go to protect what they hold sacred.
Speaking of enduring power, there's one more really interesting development that happened a bit more recently that I want to talk about.
Oh, okay. What's that?
It involves Pope Francis and a pretty remarkable gesture of unity that he made.
I'm all ears.
So in 2019, he decided to gift a portion of the relics of St. Peter to Patriarch Bartholomew.
Wait, are we talking about Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church?
That's right.
Wow, that's a huge deal, especially considering the history between those two branches of Christianity. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, I think it was meant to be a really deeply symbolic gesture. It highlights the shared history and the spiritual connection that exists between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Right, of course, they both revere St. Peter as this really foundational figure.
It's exactly. For Catholics, he's the first pope, and for the Orthodox, he's the first patriarch of Constantinople.
That's right. So by sharing these relics, Pope Francis was acknowledging that shared heritage and expressing this hope for greater unity and understanding between the two churches.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story of reconciliation. It kind of reminds us that even when we have differences, there's often more that unites us than divides us.
And it's especially powerful considering that these relics, which were once the center of so much debate and controversy, have now become this symbol of bridge building and dialogue between these two different branches of Christianity.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how something so ancient can still have such a profound impact on the present day.
It really is. It speaks to the enduring power of faith and history and that basic human desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something that transcends time and place.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have.
From that initial discovery of the necropolis to those debates over the authenticity of the relics, and even to that incredible gesture by Pope Francis.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. But I think it's important to step back for a minute and think about what all this means. You know, not just as a fascinating historical account, but also for people of faith today.
You're absolutely right. You know, for Catholics, St. Peter's tomb isn't just some archaeological site. It's something much deeper than that. It's something that touches their very core beliefs.
Right. It's like a tangible link back to the very beginnings of the church.
Exactly. It connects them to those apostles who walked with Jesus and spread his message, the ones who laid the very foundation for everything that came after.
And that direct connection back to St. Peter is really crucial for Catholics, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reinforces that unbroken line of succession from St. Peter to each succeeding pope.
Yeah.
It's a lineage that's at the very heart of Catholic authority and tradition.
So when Catholics visit St. Peter's Basilica, it's not just a sightseeing trip. It's a pilgrimage.
Right.
It's a chance to connect with their spiritual heritage in a really personal way.
And the fact that his tomb is located right beneath the grandest basilica in all of Christendom, a place that draws millions upon millions of pilgrims every year, just amplifies its significance even more.
It's almost like a physical manifestation of the enduring legacy of St. Peter and the church that he helped to establish.
Exactly. And remember that gesture we talked about earlier, Pope Francis giving a portion of the relics to Patriarch Bartholomew?
Yeah, that act of sharing with the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Well, it's a powerful testament to just how relevant St. Peter's tomb still is today. It's not just a relic of the past. It's actually playing a role in fostering dialogue and reconciliation right now in the present.
Yeah, it's like a bridge between those two branches of Christianity, a reminder of those shared roots and that common ground that unites them.
And it underscores that enduring role that St. Peter has as this unifying figure, someone who continues to inspire Christians across denominations, even all these centuries after his death.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, it really strikes me that this story is about so much more than just bones and stones and ancient inscriptions.
It really is.
It's about faith and history and that very human search for meaning that has resonated with people for centuries.
It's a testament to that deep human desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something that goes beyond time and place.
And it reminds us that even in a world that's often so driven by skepticism and doubt, there are still places and stories that have this incredible power to inspire awe and wonder.
Well said. So to everyone listening, I encourage you to keep exploring, keep digging into the history and significance of St. Peter's tomb. Read more about it, reflect on what you've learned, and let this story spark your own curiosity and deepen your own understanding of this amazing tapestry of faith and history that shapes our world.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this fascinating journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.